Okay, we want to thank everybody who has come to attend this workshop. We really appreciate your coming and being and spending some time in your busy schedule. I'm Sue Dean, and I'm the Parliamentarian for 3rd District PTA. And let me screen share and we'll begin. We want to welcome all of you, and there's a few rules just so I can get through all of the material that I need to share with you, and then we'll have time for questions. So if you'd keep your site muted, that would be very much appreciated. That way we don't hear the dogs and the kids. You don't have to worry about the kids interrupting and things like that too. If you have questions, you can type them into the chat box, and then we'll have Q&A at the end of the presentation where we'll try to answer those questions from the chat box, and you can unmute and directly ask any other questions that you might have. And I do want to let you know that the program is being recorded. Hopefully, Tom, the recording is still running. And you can access the recording on the 3rd District PTA website. It should be up there by the end of the month, along with the handouts for the bylaws workshop. So tonight we're talking about bylaws, and bylaws are one of the 3 roles of the parliamentarian. And you might ask, well, what are the other roles? A parliamentarian helps with parliamentary procedure at PTA meetings to help the president run the meeting and help the meeting go more smoothly. The parliamentarian advises the nominating committee. A nominating committee is elected at an association meeting. The parliamentarian then calls the first meeting of the nominating committee, helps them elect a chairman of their committee, and then explains the process for what they are doing in trying to fill officer positions and what those officer positions are. And the third duty is the parliamentarian facilitates the review and updating of bylaws. And that's what we're going to talk about primarily tonight. Why do we have bylaws? Bylaws are a required legal document of all 501c3 nonprofits. This is an IRS requirement, so all nonprofits have bylaws, not just PTAs. Bylaws are a contract that's adopted by vote of the membership at an association meeting. So it's a legal document. It provides the framework for PTA's purpose and mission. It establishes the structure of the organization. And it defines the operational procedures. Now, bylaws cannot be suspended. Now, what if you can't find your bylaws, though? Because I get that question a number of times. Contact 3rd District PTA, or you can contact me directly. And at the end of this presentation, you'll have my contact information. And the 3rd District office keeps a copy of the most recent bylaws for every unit within our district, and we can send them a copy to you. The state PTA, though, does not keep copies because there are well over 3,000 PTAs in California. So the only way to get a copy of your most recent bylaws is to contact 3rd District. What's in bylaws? Well, bylaws tell you about lots of different things. They give you the full legal name of your PTA. Many times PTAs use a shortened version of the name or initials when they're referring to their PTA, but you need to know what the full legal name is. The bylaws have your ID numbers. They have your state PTA ID number, your national PTA ID number, your tax filing ID numbers, which you're going to be needing each year when you file tax returns with the IRS, the State Franchise Tax Board, and the Attorney General's office. And they have your charitable trust number. Bylaws contain information about who serves on who's a member of your executive board and when elections are held for those officers. Tells you about when your executive board meetings are, when your association meetings are, and how often you have to have those meetings, especially association meetings. The bylaws tell you how much the annual dues are for people to join your PTA. They tell you about committees, particularly standing committees, and those are committees that operate all year long, such as membership committee or communications committee or fundraising committee, those types of things. And the bylaws tell you about policies and actions and procedures for the operation of your PTA. So they're really your best friend for operating your PTA. So IRS says you need to have current bylaws. So one of the things that you need to do is consider the need to update your bylaws. The president appoints a bylaws committee. It's chaired by the parliamentarian if you have one. And the bylaws committee looks at questions like, are our unit bylaws still a good fit for us? Do we have the right number of officers? Who's on our board? And when are the board meetings? When are the association meetings? Do we need to change those? How much are the membership dues? And what you're charging for people to join your PTA should be the dollar amount that is shown in your most current bylaws. And what about the standing rules? Is there anything we can add to them to help us work smarter? First, we need to keep the bylaws current because the bylaws are like a GPS. You need to know the rules of the game to help you get to where you want your PTA to go. So every year, you need to provide copies of the most recent bylaws to each board member. And at the beginning of the year, the board members are going to go over the bylaws because the only way to know what's in them is to actually look at them. You can update your bylaws at any time that you feel the need to, but you must update them at least every 5 years. That's a California State PTA requirement. Hopefully, many of you are here tonight to learn how to update your bylaws because maybe you've discovered that you have outdated bylaws. And to be current and legal, your bylaws have to have the signature of the California State PTA Parliamentarian, and they have to have the signature of the president of your unit and the secretary of your unit, signatures and dates to be fully legal. You can't implement any changes you want to make, though, until your updated bylaws have been signed off by the state PTA parliamentarian and adopted by your membership. Another reason to have bylaws current is that the California State PTA makes changes in the bylaws template that become effective immediately. But those changes are not going to show up in the bylaws copy that you have if your bylaws copy isn't current. So that's an important reason to update your bylaws to the most current template too. Keep the bylaws secure. You only share your bylaws with PTA members, and you only need to do that when requested. So that means you don't have to make copies of them and send them home with every student in the school. You don't post bylaws on publicly accessible websites. That means you're not supposed to post your PTA bylaws on the school website because anyone can go on there. I do encourage you to keep a copy on file at the school office, though, for convenience. Sometimes a member would ask to see the bylaws, and if there's a copy on file in the school office, it makes it easily accessible so they can look at it. Also, if PTA officers or chairmen are working at school and need to refer to something in the bylaws, there's a copy there at school that they can look at. So tonight, what we're really going to focus on is updating your bylaws the easiest way possible. And that's using the e-bylaws program from the California State PTA. use the state PTA e-bylaws program. Unfortunately, it's only available in English right now. So if your PTA is using bilingual bylaws, English, Spanish, let me know and I can get to you the fillable bilingual version. It's a little more difficult to fill out, and you'll probably have a lot more questions in doing it, but we can help you with that too. The e-bylaws program is easy because you're not having to figure out what to put in all of the blanks. You're going to respond to prompted questions, and then the bylaws are automatically completed for you. That part's a really nice feature. So e-bylaws in 3 steps. The first step, you have to apply for a username and password. Now, some of you, if you're a parliamentarian, may have discovered that in the procedure book that was passed on to you, your PTA already has a username and password. If that's your situation, you can use that username and password. The second thing is, after you have a username and password, you have to access the e-bylaws program, enter information that they ask for, and select the options. That means clicking on yes or no, or the particular choices of the options. The third step, you're going to submit your third district, you're going to submit your a PDF of your e-bylaws to third district PTA for review. And then we will send it on to the state PTA parliamentarian for approval and signature. So first step is to obtain a password, and I'm going to walk you through these steps so it'll make it as easy as possible. Go to the state PTA website, www.capta.org. Click on PTA Leaders at the top of the screen. Click on Run Your PTA. Click on Bylaws and Standing Rules. And I'm sending you this route so that you can read all the information that's there on the Bylaws and Standing Rules. Click on the box, Check Out e-bylaws. And then click on the box, Request Username and Password. You're going to have to answer a few simple questions: your name, the legal name of your PTA, the ID number for your PTA. That's the California State PTA ID number, and it's on the cover of the existing bylaws that you have. And you're going to need to know that you're part of third district PTA. Now let's go through and look at what you'll actually see on the screen. Now this picture over here is a constantly changing picture, so don't expect to see the same one that you see in this example. Going to go up to the boxes across the top. You're going to click on PTA Leaders. You're going to go down to Run Your PTA. You're going to go over to go over and down to Bylaws and Standing Rules. And here you will come up with you'll click on Access e-bylaws and then Request Username and Password. You notice there's 2 things here. So you can't do everything all in the first day. There's a few days time gap between when you request a username and password and when you go in and fill in the information and that sort of thing. You should receive your username and password within 3 to 5 days emailed back to you from the state PTA. Now, once you have that, you can go back to the state website and enter information. So you'll recognize these same steps. Go back to the website, click on PTA Leaders at the top of the screen, click on Run Your PTA, click on Bylaws and Standing Rules, click on Check Out e-bylaws, and this time you're going to click on the box Access e-bylaws. So I'll walk you through it again so you'll be really familiar with it. Click on PTA Leaders, go down to Run Your PTA, go across and down to bylaws and standing rules. And then you're going to click on access e-bylaws here. And this time you can enter information. Now, the first screen that shows up has information about your specific PTA. However, you cannot change anything on this particular screen. So look it over. If you see anything that is not currently correct, contact me and I will send, particularly like your school may have changed grades. You've added a pre-kindergarten, or you no longer have a 6th grade at your school, that sort of thing. And I can send a change of status form to the state PTA, and the office will change this information so it will print out correctly for you on your bylaws. You were here earlier for the membership workshop, so you're a little bit familiar with that. You choose how much you want to charge for dues for your PTA. And when people join your PTA, they're joining the national PTA, and the national PTA dues are $2.25. They're joining the state PTA, California State PTA, and those dues are $2. And they're joining 3rd District PTA, and the district dues are 75 cents. So this portion below the line, when we add it together, totals $5, and that's called per capita dues, and that's the portion that does not belong to your PTA and gets sent on to the state PTA. In this particular example, this PTA chose to charge the minimum amount, the lowest possible amount they could for their members to join. So they chose $5. Well, if the per capita dues that get passed on are $5, that leaves 0 for the unit. That's okay if that's the way you choose. Most PTAs choose, when they fill in this blank, they choose $6 or $7 or $8 or $10 or maybe even $15. But it needs to be a reasonable amount for your particular school. And membership is not considered a fundraiser, so these should be just basic amounts. So this part down here shows up automatically, and you need to enter the dues that you want to charge. Then click Save. And you'll be clicking Save as we go along so that you don't lose information. Then click Next. Officers and their election. Do you want to have an executive vice president? And you click yes or no. Now, the next question is a little bit tricky. They're asking the number of vice presidents that you want. And this question is really asking vice presidents, regular vice presidents, in addition to an executive vice president. So if you've said no for an executive vice president, you might want, and we would encourage you to have at least one regular vice president. If you want an executive vice president, but no additional vice presidents, then you need to use these arrows and enter 0 here. Because if you clicked yes for executive vice president and you entered 1 as the answer to this question, when you print out your bylaws, you're going to see that they've put in 2 vice president positions. So that's a little bit confusing. Do you want a corresponding secretary? And a corresponding secretary is an individual who writes the thank you notes and responds to donations to your PTA and that sort of thing. All PTAs are required to have a regular secretary who takes minutes at meetings, and the majority of PTAs choose to have just one secretary, and they can be responsible for thank you notes as well as taking minutes. Do you want a financial secretary? The financial secretary is an individual who takes in and accounts for the deposits and makes the deposits at the bank for any money that your PTA takes in. And then a treasurer pays the bills and writes the checks. Again, the majority of PTAs choose to have one financial officer, a treasurer, who is responsible for both the deposits and paying the bills. So if you don't want a financial secretary, just click no. Is your auditor a voting member of your board? Are they an officer? Because you have a choice. All PTAs have to have their books audited twice a year. You can elect an auditor, or you can use an outside auditor who's not a voting member of your board, but maybe a volunteer parent at the school or a community volunteer. Or you can go to a professional accountant or CPA and have them audit your books. So this question is asking, is your auditor a voting member of your board? Are they an officer? And you click either yes or no. Nominating committee members. Nominating committee members are going to come up with a proposed slate of officers to elect for the following year. It needs to be an odd number. It needs to be a small enough number to be reasonable so that you can find that number of people that are willing to serve on the nominating committee. And it needs to be more than one. So typically most PTAs use 3 or 5. I would strongly encourage you to have at least one alternate, because the nominating committee is elected 2 months before the election. A lot can happen in those 2 months. Employment conditions can change for somebody who was elected to the nominating committee, and now they no longer have the time to serve, or they could have moved out of town, or illness could have entered the picture and they can't serve. So if you have at least one alternate standing ready to serve if needed, it's really helpful. Whoops, let's go back. Officers assume their duties on July 1, and that's what you put in here. 3rd District requires that all units within 3rd District have July 1 as the starting date for when officers assume their duties. That makes it the same as your fiscal year. If it were different, you would have to have additional audits. And most PTAs don't want to have to do that. So that's why we require all PTAs to put July 1 here. Sometimes a vacancy occurs in the office of president. Who do you want to serve notice of that vacancy? The executive vice president or the first vice president? So then once you've answered these questions, click save, and then go on to click next and go on to the next one. Duties of officers and chairpersons. You see the red asterisk that's there. That means there's a required entry here. You need to assign an additional duty to, or a specific duty to the vice president. You could enter aid to the president, or you could enter fundraising coordinator or some specific things. If you have more than one vice president, then you could enter a specific duty for each of the vice presidents. Committee members may meet via teleconferencing. I would strongly encourage you to check yes on this. I think most PTAs, if they have committees that are meeting now, are having to do it virtually. But in the future, you want for your PTA to have that option. So even if you don't have committees meeting virtually now, check yes, and you've kept that option for your future boards to be able to do. PTA requires 2 signatures on all checks. The president and the treasurer are automatically 2 possible signers for the checks, but it's always easier to have the option of 1 or 2 more people that are available and are authorized to sign checks if one of the president or the treasurer isn't available to sign them. So you can check here for positions. You notice that the secretary and the auditor are not options, because that's a conflict with their assigned duties. So click save and then go on to the next information. Now, association meetings. You're required to have a minimum of 3 association meetings, but you can decide when they're held. You need to decide the day of the month, of the week, and the week of the month that you want to have your association. That's your general membership meetings. And you use this arrow to scroll down until you get which week you want them and which day of the week you want them. And it'll pop up into the screen. Then you go down and you enter the months going from left to right, just as you would read the lines in a book, entering, using the arrows, the months that you want to have your meeting, and ending after the word and putting the last meeting of the year in this particular block. Just leave the others blank. Now, you need to have the first association meeting as early as possible in the school year, because that's the meeting where the membership votes to approve the budget and votes to approve the program, the things that you want to do for the year. So if you wait till October for the first meeting, that's really too late, because your PTA already needs to be operating. So I would encourage that first meeting to be August or September. Many PTAs find that having 4 or 5 meetings is easier than 3, but you can get by with just the 3. You do not need to have association meetings every single month of the year unless you particularly want that. You have to determine when your annual election meeting is going to be held, the specific month that it's going to be held in. But the state PTA has some requirements. It can only be in March or April. So you need to go back and look at what months you're holding association meetings in, and be sure that you marked that you're going to have an association meeting in the same month that you want to have your annual election meeting. In this example, you can see they put March, and yes, they are having an association meeting in March. If you want April, it can only be either the first week of the month of April or the second week. So you need to look at when, if you choose April, you need to go back up and look at, are your association meetings held on the first or the second week of the month? Otherwise, May is not allowed. Board members to call a special meeting. The president can call a special meeting of the association at any time he or she feels a need to do that. But sometimes things come up that board members feel it's important for the president to call a meeting. So how many board members do you want it to take to require a president to call a special board meeting? It needs to be a reasonable number, small enough to be reasonable, and it needs to be more than 1. So typically, a lot of PTAs choose 3. But again, it's your choice as long as it's not 1. Number of members in a quorum. Well, what is a quorum? A quorum is the number of PTA members that have to be present at the meeting in order to conduct business. There are some rules that the state PTA has for determining a quorum. A quorum is the number of elected officers, elected and appointed officers, plus 4 or 11, whichever is greater. Now, if you have more than 10 standing committee chairs, then you have to take that into account, which will affect your quorum. But most PTAs don't have more than 10 standing committee chairs. So the number of chairs doesn't affect the quorum for an association meeting. So again, the quorum is the number of elected and appointed officers plus 4 or 11, whichever is greater. Now, some of you say, well, I'm not going to remember that. Well, one of the handouts for this workshop that we will post on our 3rd District website is directions for filling out bylaws from the state PTA, and it has that quorum information in it, so you don't need to worry.
Oh, so
Yes.
we had quite a few members join, but there's a couple of questions in the chat. Are you going to take those now, or did you want to take them at the end?
I can take them now. Go ahead.
Okay. There were questions there about the strikeouts in the bylaws and whether it's possible to print out a copy of the bylaws that don't have any of the strikeouts, so it's easier to read.
I can send them a fillable copy of the bylaws. And they can see, because it has a fillable copy of the bylaws has no strikeouts and nothing in the blanks, so that you can see what's there. So if they contact me, I can email them a copy of that. Otherwise, they're not going to see a copy until they've entered this information on the e-bylaws program, and then it automatically does the lining out and that sort of thing. Okay.
So I want to check with I guess, well, HP, Chan, and Gina, because they were kind of commenting on the strikeouts, whether that answers their questions. If it doesn't, I guess they can come off mute and
at the end, and then we can talk about it. Yeah. And
then, well, one other question in there is, are general members invited to a special meeting? And can you have a board-only meeting without the general membership?
All right, what we were talking about before was special meetings for association. We're going to talk about executive board here, and you'll see down on the screen where it talks about board members needed to call a special meeting of the executive board. So you can have two types of special meetings. One is an special association meeting, and the membership, all members are invited to that. Or you could be calling a special meeting of the executive board, and only executive board members are invited to that. Okay. Is that it at this point? Okay.
For the executive board meetings, you can choose which day to hold them, but you can't choose which month. So is it just expected they're every month, or the same months as the association?
No, the executive board meetings are, which is what we were just going to talk about. Executive board meetings are held monthly. So that you can really, because the executive board is expected to conduct a lot of the main business of the PTA, and making the inquiries on things, doing the research for activities that you might want to do, doing the planning for it, those kinds of things. So if you only had 3 association meetings, the minimum, there's no way you would be able to do all the work of the PTA. So that's why the executive board meets monthly. Although if they need to, they can call extra meetings to work on particular things too. So that's always an option.
Yeah, and I'm guessing because bank statements are usually done monthly, then it's a good idea to have those meetings just to monthly check the bank reconciliation.
Right, and all of that sort of thing too, yes. So you get to choose when the executive board meeting is held. And you notice here it shows you're picking the week of the month and the day of the week, and you use the arrow and go down until you find what you want to do. And you notice here it says this is going to show up in the standing rules. A number of years back, it used to show up in the very body of the bylaws, but now they've moved that question to the standing rules because the standing rules are more flexible and easier to change. And a lot of times you need to change when the executive board meets each year because you have new members on the board, and they have different personal schedules of when they're available to meet. So it does add more flexibility. Your PTA is going to vote on a budget at the beginning of the year. Your membership is, but things come up, and sometimes something will come up that you want to spend money on, but you're not going to have another association meeting to vote on it for a while. So this allows the board to spend unbudgeted money between association meetings, as long as you have the money. And so it shows up here, and you get to fill in the amount. It's a required box. But this, again, the state PTA has some rules. If you have 8 or more association meetings, then the highest dollar amount you can put in there is $500. You can put less if you want, but you can go as high as $500. If you have 5 to 7 association meetings, then the board could spend up to $750 on unbudgeted expenses, so long as they had the money available. If you have only 3 to 4 association meetings, then the board is allowed to have up to a maximum, to spend up to a maximum of $1,000 on unbudgeted expenses. Again, the requirement, you need to have the money available, and it needs to be for reasonable things too, because anything that the board spends money on that wasn't in the budget has to get ratified by the association at the next meeting, and you want to be sure it's something that they'll approve. Because if you spend money that they don't approve on, then the board members are responsible for reimbursing the PTA for that. How many people do you want it to require, of board members, to require a special meeting be called for executive board? And so this is different than the special association meeting. But again, it needs to be a small enough number to be reasonable, and it needs to be more than 1. So typically it could be 2 or 3. If you have a small board, if you have a very large board, it might be as many as 4, but be reasonable about it. The number of members in a quorum for executive board meetings. You can't just enter any number in that box. The state PTA has rules. The quorum for an executive board meeting is the number of elected and appointed officers plus the principal and the teacher rep divided by 2 plus 1, or the next higher number. If it's a half number, then you go to the next full number. So again, the quorum for board, or 5, whichever is greater. So again, the quorum for an executive board meeting, the rules are, it has to be the number of elected and appointed officers, we're not talking chairman, but officers, plus principal, plus teacher representative, divided in 2, plus 1, or to the next higher whole number. And again, those directions are on those instructions that will be posted on our website if you need to see them again. Now, if you marked that your auditor, if you marked yes, that your auditor was a member of your executive board, that means they're a voting member, this will show up gray here and you don't fill anything in. But if you marked no, they're not a member of your executive board, you're going to use a volunteer or a professional, then you have to enter, using this arrow, a month that the board is going to ratify the appointment of the auditor or the company that's going to be doing the audit. It needs to be done before the audit is performed. So that should be ratified at a board meeting sometime in the fall, but prior to January 1, because the first audit is going to be done in January. The next one is, do you want board members to be able to meet via teleconferencing? And again, I would strongly encourage you to check the yes box so that even if you don't want to do it now, although I think most PTAs are doing it virtually right now, but it allows that option for future boards, for future PTAs to be able to do. So that's important. Then you click save and you go on to the next screen. The next screen is council membership. And you may think, well, what do I do here? Because we don't have any councils. Ignore this screen. You don't have to do anything. Don't worry about that anything shows up checked on it. I wanted you to see what it looked like. But go on and just click next and move on. The next question is standing rules. And standing rules contain a lot of information about the operations of your PTA. And one of the things that's there are standing committees. And what are standing committees? Those are committees that operate all year long, such as hospitality, communication, or it might say social media, or it could be a fundraising, that sort of thing. And so you would enter those there. You're not required to have any standing committees, but they're asking if you do, enter them here so that they'll be printed in your standing rules. And then you click save and you go on. However, you may find that when you look at your bylaws, there are problems. You'll get a message that the bylaws are incomplete. And you go through them and you look, and wherever there's a problem, the box will be outlined in red. And if you hover your mouse over it, you'll see a box that kind of explains what the problem is. And in this case, the date they selected for their executive board to meet is not 14 days before the association meeting. This area of maximum unbudgeted bills is the biggest area that people run into problems are because they type in the wrong dollar amount that's allowed. And so you need to fix that. So you fix the errors, and then you can print out a complete PDF of your bylaws. If you don't fix the errors and you try to print it out, you're going to see a watermark draft mark across every page of the bylaws and across the cover. So that's an obvious sign to you, you have a problem. Don't print it out and send it in to us, but don't fret over it too long if you have problems. Just contact me and I can talk you through it pretty quickly and we can figure out what the problem is. I am able to access the e-bylaws program for all of the PTAs within 3rd District. So if you're looking at the program, I can open it also and look at it and tell you exactly what your problem is. We can go through and find it very quickly. So don't waste a lot of your time struggling to find the problem. If you don't find it right away, just contact me and we'll get to the bottom of it very quickly. Then you can click on bylaws and you'll get a final copy saved as a PDF. It looks like this. The current copy right now, as of last night when I checked on the website, was the 2020 version. Hopefully the 2021 will show up pretty soon. But right now you can use the 2020 version of this. The third step in the process now is you're going to save that PDF and you're going to submit it to 3rd District PTA for review before we in turn then send it on to the state PTA. So share a copy with your board. If your board was meeting in person, you would print out copies. But if you're meeting virtually, you can share it electronically. Your board's going to look at the proposed changes that you're making and approve the version of the updated bylaws that you want. They're not going to, so you're going to make a list of all the changes that you're proposing and share that with your board too. Your board approves those updated bylaws, but your board does not sign anything yet. All they are doing is approving it for you to submit it on to 3rd District for review. You're also going to prepare a PTA bylaws submittal form. And this is found on the 3rd District PTA website. That's another one of the handouts for this workshop that I've given to Tom to post with the video from this workshop. It's also available on the state PTA website. So you're going to submit electronically right now as an email attachment a PDF of your bylaws and the submittal form. And the submittal form, you're going to include all of the changes that you're making, and you can add an additional page if you need to do that, if you're making that many changes. And it includes your contact information. So if I have questions in reviewing them, I know who to contact about them and how to get in touch with you. So you're submitting two things, not just the bylaws. You don't send them directly to the state PTA. If you do that, you'll get them returned unsigned. They don't even look at them because there are so many PTAs in California and the state parliamentarian is only one individual. So the district has to review them and help with any errors and things like that first before he gets them to review. So you send a copy and you can email it to the 3rd District PTA, and there's our email address. The office secretary logs them in and then she forwards them to me for review. Typically, once you email them off, they're returned to you within 6 to 8 weeks, sometimes much, much sooner. And it all depends on how many PTAs at one time are submitting bylaws to the state parliamentarian for approval and signature. So it could be a real quick turnaround time, or it could be 6 to 8 weeks, the full 6 to 8 weeks. Right after the bylaws are returned to you. So after the state parliamentarian signs them, they're returned to 3rd District, and I will return them to whoever's name is on the submittal form that you sent along with them. They need to be adopted by your school PTA association in order to be fully legal. So the bylaws you get back are only going to have the signature of the state parliamentarian. They're not fully legal yet. Your president needs to give 30 days notice for an association meeting. And on the agenda will be adopting updated bylaws as approved by the California State PTA parliamentarian. And that notice will include a list of the changes that were made in these bylaws so that members know what's different from the existing bylaws that you have. Once they're voted on, they're signed and dated by the unit president and the secretary. They're fully legal at that point and effective immediately. They have to be voted on by a 2/3 majority vote at that association meeting, but then they're legal. And then copies are given to the board. Right now, you're probably going to share it with your board electronically. You're probably going to have to print out a copy. The best way is to have an actual signature on it, although virtual signatures are allowed. But most people, when they're looking at bylaws, feel more comfortable when they see that at least one of those 3 signatures is an actual signature. So share the signed copies with your board, and then send a copy of the signature page to 3rd District PTA, because we keep a copy of your most recent approved bylaws on file in our office, and we can insert this fully signed signature page into the copy we have on file. That way, maybe next year, if somebody can't find a copy, say the new president can't find a copy of your bylaws or whatever, you can contact us and we can send out a legal copy of your bylaws. Okay, there's my contact information. My cell phone number, if you have questions, is 916-206-7658. Okay, do we have any other questions? First of all, in the chat, and then we'll open it up for actual other questions. Any more questions, Tom, in the chat?
Yeah, there's a couple of questions in the chat. What positions are able to be a 3rd signer on the account? Since you said the secretary and auditor can't be because of a conflict of interest.
Any of the vice presidents can be. If you have a financial secretary, they could be. And a historian could be.
Okay, all right. So you can't just have a regular member be a 3rd signer. They have to be on.
They have to be an officer.
An officer, okay.
They have to be an elected officer. So since parliamentarians are appointed, a parliamentarian is not a signer on the checking account either. That's one of the reasons Not the only reason, but one of the reasons it's really helpful to have at least one vice president so that you have another option for as a check signer.
Okay. And there was another question regarding quorum. If you only have 3 board members, then what would your quorum be?
Remember, your board is the elected and appointed officers plus the principal and the teacher rep. And some PTAs beg and plead and get 2 teacher reps. They get a primary grade teacher rep and an intermediate grade teacher rep, but it helps their board membership so they have enough people to reach their quorum. So that's one possibility too. If you have, that's another reason to try to have chairmen that serve on that board, because the chairman can count towards your quorum too.
Okay, all right. Well, let's see, somebody asked if you can repeat your phone number.
Okay, 916-206-7658.
And it's so the parliamentarian, it's the HP was asking, does the parliamentarian count towards quorum calculation?
Yes, yes, they do.
And okay, so I think that's all the questions I see in the chat, but I think others can raise their hand or unmute themselves and ask questions.
Okay, at this point, feel free to unmute yourself and okay, I see a hand up. Melanie.
Hi, what if you can't get anybody willing to be your parliamentarian? Who does this, the president?
Then the president is going, yes, basically, or sometimes the president will ask the vice president, they'll appoint a committee and then ask the vice president to meet with them and go over the bylaws and the positions and that kind of thing. So it either falls to the president, or if the president delegates it to a vice president if you don't have a parliamentarian.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have a question. My name is
Okay.
Jan. In regards to like who has voting rights again, because I keep hearing that the president doesn't have a voting right, the principal doesn't have a voting right.
Okay. Normally, the president facilitates the meeting and only votes if they choose to break a tie or if it's a written vote. So that way they're not influencing anybody else with their vote, because the president does have the right to vote, but they just don't vote if it's a show of hands or people saying, you don't want to unduly influence anybody else. But sometimes a president feels strongly about a particular issue and they can call for a written vote on it. And that way the president can vote too, and nobody knows how anybody's voting. If you're doing this virtually with Zoom, you just launch a poll with whatever you're being voted on and respond. The principal, and the teacher rep, just like any other board member, have a vote. Now, the principal only has 1 vote, but remember though that the principal is in charge of the school, and so they have kind of the last word on what a PTA does. So if the principal says no, it basically isn't going to matter. If the principal says, no, you can't do this particular activity on my campus, it's not going to matter if the majority of the PTA voted, yes, we want to do it. It's not going to happen. You see how that works? But the principal does have a vote.
And the principal has a vote whether or not the principal becomes a member or not. So I'm thinking of a situation where, say, the PTA parents, they want to have an event actually off campus, and they have it as a vote of, on the executive board, and the principal has not become a member, does he get to vote?
Technically, no. The principal acts as an advisor to the PTA board, and they get a vote if they've joined the PTA or PTSA, just like any other member of the board. So you're going to get that principal's input, though, their advice and things, whether or not they have joined, because that's why that's important to have them there as an advisor to the PTA, because they know the school district rules and what can and can't be done on campus or involving students and those kinds of things. So even if they choose not to join, but we strongly encourage PTAs to have your principal set an example and join the PTA. Many principals join the PTA and encourage all staff to join. So we get schools that have 100% teachers and other staff joining the PTA because they know that the principal expects it. That joining the PTA is the minimum level of support for the PTA and what the PTA provides for the students and families at the school.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
I have a couple questions, Sue. One was, it sounded like something you said suggested you might have a, I mean, a secret vote, or a vote where the people voting don't know what other people have voted.
Anytime you have controversial issues, and you don't feel that people will vote their conscience or what they really believe because they'll be concerned about what other people think, have a written vote.
Okay.
And
we've been lucky enough not to have that, but
the president can just say, can just announce, we're going to take a written vote on this and pass out ballots, or hold a poll and do it that way.
Okay.
To do it.
Yeah. No,
But a lot of times you don't have to have a written ballot because it takes longer than to have the ballots counted and that kind of thing if you're doing it physically, a physical written ballot.
Right.
The nice thing about a poll is it counts them automatically.
I'm not sure I know how to do that on Zoom, but yeah, like we've never had to do that. It's usually like a voice vote and kind of unanimous or something, very little.
Right.
But again, it's good to know you
do have to. Now, if anybody asks, any member asks for a written vote, then you have to hold a written vote on that.
Okay.
So you need to be, if you're meeting in person, you need to be prepared with Post-it notes and pencils or whatever that you can pass out quickly, and people can vote yes or no and collect them and count, that kind of thing. So do remember that that is a member's right to request a confidential written ballot on a particular item.
Okay, one other question. So we do have the principal, as I understand it, as a new president, we do have the principal and two teacher representatives.
Oh, good.
On this board, as far as I know, but my question is, do they have to be members of the PTA to be on the board? I've got to check.
Not to be. The principal can be on the board without being a member, but they need to be a member to vote. The teacher reps are not there in an advisory capacity, so they need to be members to be on the board.
Okay, I'm going to check. I assume they are, but it's good to know.
Okay. Any other questions? Because we want to make this process and everything as easy as possible for everybody to do. So don't hesitate to email me or call me or text me with questions. I'm only too happy to help.
I have another question.
Yes, Jen.
So for the teacher reps, we have 3 of them. Each of their vote counts, right? Or does it count as one?
Most PTAs let each one count as a vote. If you've got those positions listed in your as board, now if you just have a teacher rep listed, then technically the teacher representatives, plural, only get one vote. Well, how is that going to work out real well? Are they going to have to confer on everything when they vote? That kind of thing. Now, some PTAs have a teacher rep listed on their officers, on their board, and then they have rotating teachers. They may have 3 different teachers, but one comes to different meetings. So they have one teacher rep always present at a meeting, but it might be a different teacher than at the last meeting, that sort of thing. But again, that allows for the one vote if they've only allowed one teacher rep.
Okay, then that's probably what's going on, is because they do rotate in case one can't be there and the other can. And then I think that's why it's been delegated as one vote. So, okay.
Now, I know some PTAs, if there's nobody against it on the board, and say you have two of your teacher reps show up at the same meeting, there's no problem with letting them both vote if it's not controversial things. But usually if your bylaws say a teacher rep, now your bylaws, you need to fix your bylaws to add 2 teacher reps if you want them 2 teacher reps to be at every meeting, a primary and an intermediate, that kind of thing, and to have each of them have a vote. So when we print out your bylaws, because the e-bylaws program doesn't ask you how many teacher reps do you want. So once you print them out, you can go back in and add in, by printing blue or black ink, 2 teacher rep. Line out the word a teacher rep, and above it put 2. And then you scan them and save them again as a PDF. So you can make some adjustments physically to those bylaws if you need to, like that, before submitting them for approval.
Well, and I feel like just running that strikeout train of questions to ground, like, you know, if you're using Microsoft Word and they have the red lines at the end, there's always this accept all changes and you get a clean version. But it sounds like you never get a clean version here. It always has some of the strikeouts, which might help you prepare that little notice about what are all the changes or something. Right,
because the state PTA parliamentarian wants to know what changes you're making. And so the strikeouts help he or she, in this case it's a him, see what changes that you're making. So if you are manually adding in 2 teacher reps, he can see that. Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions? We're at the end of our time, so I kind of want to respect everybody's time. So maybe one real quick question, if anybody else has got anything pressing, and then we'll adjourn.
Just one last question about the teacher rep. And you said that they're part of the board members, so they would have to be at the board meeting.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Well, again, I want to thank all of you for being here. I really appreciate you spending your valuable time coming out and learning more about bylaws. I know we have a number of PTAs in 3rd District that have outdated bylaws. If you go to the back of your existing bylaws, first thing to look for is, are they signed? Because if you're using bylaws that are not signed, they're not legal. Look at the date that the state PTA parliamentarians signed them and the date the officers signed them. That tells you how old they are. And if they're older than 5 years, you absolutely need to update them as soon as possible. Now, you don't have to update them, but you can if you want them to reflect any changes that the state PTA may have made in the template that went into effect immediately when the state board of managers voted on it, but they're not showing up on yours, so you don't know about them. That's why I encourage PTAs to look at maybe a 3-year turnaround instead of the 5. But state PTA does allow, they try to be reasonable, so they do allow a 5-year time period before you are required to update them. I have a few PTAs that update their bylaws, they look at them and update them because they want them on the newest template. They update them every year, and that's fine too. So I'm willing to review them and send them on and deal with that if you want to. I know of one PTA last term that updated them twice in 1 year because they were on the 2019 template and they wanted the 2020 template when it came out because it allowed for virtual association meetings. And anything older than 2020 does not allow for virtual association meetings. We've all discovered in the last year and a half how handy that is. Now, the state PTA has made an exception for units to hold virtual meetings through December 31st of this year. They're talking about extending that, but we don't know if that's going to take place. So to cover your basis, the best way is to update your bylaws to the most recent version and allow for virtual association meetings and virtual board meetings and virtual committee meetings. Because you need to abide by your bylaws, and if the bylaws don't say that you can hold virtual meetings, then you can't hold them past December 31st. So, okay. Okay, well, thank you so much, and check on our website within a week or so, and Tom should have the video loaded up and the handouts there, and you can look over anything that you didn't catch as we went through it tonight. And I wish you good luck in updating your bylaws if you choose to do that. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Good night.